everyone, Dylan from the Smart Economy Podcast. Today we're joined by Ishan Bhaidani.
Bhaidani, yeah.
Bhaidani, American, awesome last name, very hard sometimes. We're at day one of Permissionless III, and Ishan is the co-founder of Scrib.
Yep.
So first of all, I want to thank you and Scrib for inviting us to be out here.
Of course.
It's because you guys being the media lead that we actually have an opportunity here, so many thanks to you.
Yeah.
Maybe you could just start by kicking off the convo with what's your genesis into crypto and blockchain? How did you get here?
Yeah. So, the long version, it probably isn't worth getting into, but I got into the space pretty heavily around 2019, 2020. Probably late 2019, had some friends show me the early blue chip DeFi stuff, right? Maker, Aave, Compound. I came from private equity. I was in PE before. I had my own PE fund that I ran. As soon as I saw really Compound, it was just super intuitive to me. I just kind of got it, understood it. It was just very clean UI. And so then from there, did all the digging, did my 1,000 hours of research into kind of understanding infrastructure, Ethereum, smart contracts, all that kind of stuff. And then went through DeFi Summer. Did decently well for myself in DeFi Summer.
Nice.
It's a little
Congrats.
hard not to. And then from there, started working in the space, started contributing to a lot of different projects, worked on a lot of different DeFi protocols in the space, cut my teeth at a couple different places, Redacted, etc. And then, just kind of saw that there was a pretty big gap in the space for people that could do really high quality content comms, creative. And that was where the thesis for Scrib came from.
Yeah, and so when you were doing PE, were you working on the content and comm side, or were you working on the deal structure flow side?
Yeah. I mean, it was just me and my brother. We were a low 8-figure PE fund. We did everything: the finances, the operations, the kind of whole thing. We were running it, and so had a little bit of experience doing the kind of comms and stuff and content. But really, we were doing the finance side. I have a finance background.
Got it.
Just kind of came in from that angle, which is how I kind of saw the DeFi stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, just way better infrastructure, way more efficiency in order to kind of build financial infrastructure, and so then came pretty easy and intuitive.
Yeah, so as you're doing your 1,000 hours of research, you learn what is good content and what isn't good content, but you're also, the lens in which you viewed the space is coming from the finance side, and the kind of aha moments you're having with DeFi and no intermediaries, you're able to send funds from person to person.
Yeah.
There's relatively privacy as long as you don't know whose identity is attached to what wallet.
Mm-hmm.
What made you realize that I'm going to leave this financial lens that I have and start building out Scrib?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was just, this was, I think all great businesses come from a problem solution mindset, right? And so we just identified that this was a massive problem. A lot of really great protocols that I was working with just had no idea how to actually acquire users, right? That the way we like to think about it is how do we help protocols turn into businesses, right? Mm-hmm. And you have an incredibly smart group of people in the space. A lot of them just don't have a lot of business experience. Crypto tends to skew younger. They tend to skew a little more technical. And so very few people really understood how to build an actual business out of a really interesting piece of software. And so that's when we came in and I think we can help actual teams solve the business building side, which a lot of it is distribution, customer acquisition, a lot of these very traditional SaaS concepts. Just because you're Web3 doesn't mean you don't want to build a business. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work if you're not actually building the business side. And so that's when the marketing and distribution angle was relatively small at the time, and we realized there was just a lot of opportunity to come in and do it at a really, really high level.
Right, and so I know Scrib because we've actually been funneled a handful of guests for the Smart Economy podcast by some of the account managers that you have.
Yep.
So is Scrib just a PR firm, or are you also providing more cradle to the grave services for these younger entrepreneurs who might only know how to code but don't necessarily know relationship building, comms, marketing, things like that? What other services do you offer other than just PR?
Yeah, so the way I would think about Scrib is we are a creative content and comms, or communications. And so creative is everything from brand design, visual identity, brand strategy, right? People really don't understand how do you make a project or make a brand or an idea something that people have irrational love for, right? If you think about Nike, it's okay, well, Nike is just shoes and socks and t-shirts and stuff like that, right? But people really resonate with the brand, which is why they're able to pay such a premium, right? And in crypto, you really don't see many great brands, right? I would say there's Coinbase. I think you're starting to see some new people who really understand how to invest in brand, the Monads, the Bear Chains of the world. But in reality, there aren't a ton of really great brands, right? So people don't understand how to create that irrational brand love, right? And so then how do you actually create that visual identity and that brand identity, that brand strategy? And then what are the channels in which you can help grow it, right? So there's organic with content, right? You want to do really well on socials. You want to have really great, a mix of technical, but also brand building type of content. And then there's also the communication side, which is like, how do you do media relations? How do you show up in all these different places? How do people find you? And so then you put all of that together with a really great brand strategy, and that's kind of what Scrib helps you do in order to kind of create that really good distribution funnel, right? So it's like, how are you attracting users? And then at the end of the day, how do you get them bottom of the funnel, which is, become the heaviest users of your protocol, become your biggest supporters, your biggest fans, and actually end up driving the distribution for you after that, right? So it's really about a function of like creating brand and then creating a funnel for users, for protocols and projects to actually help get users.
Cool. And so without going into any names necessarily, there are larger kind of enmeshed PR firms who provide similar, more or less services that Scrib does. And you have to kind of compete with these like global brand names that might be among the first phone calls that a team makes when they're looking for a comms team. So like, how do you, as like a scrappy little startup, I guess you're not scrappy anymore, you're 2 years old, but like when you were first starting out, how did a scrappy comms team, how did a scrappy Scrib start going out and trying to find new clients and really building a roster?
Yeah. I mean, we started 2 years ago. I think in November 1, we'll hit our second year anniversary. We started with a team of 3. Today, we're a team of about 100.
Wow.
So we are one of the larger teams in the space. And we think it's just a function of product market fit, right? Like we come at it from a different perspective, right? We are not just a comms agency, because most projects, don't need comms, right? Like that's not the actual underlying issue that you have, right? A lot of times it's organic distribution. A lot of times, most of the time it's brand, right? And so we come at it from a more holistic perspective, right? So we're actually thinking about, again, problem solution mindset, right? Like what is the problem? It's actually like generating ROI, right? So like you have all these investors that come into these protocols. How do you actually help them generate an ROI? That's the first kind of framework to think from, right? And so if the ROI is getting more users, getting more developers, then you can start to build the strategy after that. But if you're only doing corporate communications, that's not going to solve all the problems. Those might band-aid some things, but that's not actually going to solve the fundamental underlying issues, right? So the way we think about Scrib is we want to be kind of the full suite of services that actually help you solve the underlying issues, help you turn your protocol into a business, build your brand, all of those things together, so that we're not just a one-trick pony, because what we find in the space is that one trick doesn't really help you solve the problem.
I know I'm asking the goldsmith to sell me gold, but is this a strategy that you see as more competitive than maybe like larger firms? And are you afraid that if you grow too large, that you might not be able to provide these growth strategies for all your clients that you onboard?
Yeah, I mean, we think that the space is going to continue to grow, and it's going to continue to grow at a pretty massive trajectory. Like, hey, we will be some of the biggest bulls you'll find, right? Like, we think this space is like exponential in size over a 20, 30, 40, 50 year. And so we're building a brand that's going to be able to last, and an ecosystem that's going to be able to last through the growth of the entire industry, right? So we're not just building for today. We have a framework of how we think things are going to go. And so that gives us the ability to then compete, because we're not, a lot of the other people that we may potentially compete with tend to be pretty short-minded. I mean, I think it's like an issue with the entirety of the space, right? People end up thinking about 1, 3, 5 year time horizons, where we're playing over a 5, 10, 15, 20 year game here. And so we're building a company that's built to last, right? And that takes a lot of thoughtful strategy, that takes a lot of thoughtful communications. But at the end of the day, we want to create an infrastructure that is here to stand, and not just how much value can we extract over a short period of time.
Yeah, and so again, I want to show you guys for inviting us to be here. It's really an honor to have been invited and to get our media passes comped by the team. So how did the relationship with the permissionless folks, Blockworks, Bankless, how did that kind of like start between you and them?
Yeah. We're huge fans of the Blockworks guys. We've been working with them and talking to them for a long time. I actually met Jason. Actually, it's really been like almost 2 years since I met Jason. And we've always been talking about different ways. I mean, we have a lot of respect for each other as entrepreneurs. And, we come at it from we really resonate because we have these more traditional business models that we've brought into this new infrastructure, right? And so we really have had a lot of conversations and at length about what it's like and what are the advantages, disadvantages of taking a traditional industry and applying it to this really, really new nascent industry. And so from there, we've always been thinking about ways that we can work together. They have, obviously an awesome conference that they put together, and we wanted to be there to support and think about what are the ways that we can draw more attention to this conference. They have, great relationships, some of the, everything from U.S. senators and House representatives to some of the biggest founders. And so what can we do to add value to that? All we have to do is really bring a spotlight. And so that's where it comes from guys like you, some of the other media people that are here. is the effort to bring a spotlight to the things that are happening. I think I think one of the biggest, most interesting things is really bringing a messaging component to permissionless around the election cycle, right?
Yes.
So like this is basically the last large election before we hit like the actual voting season, and so that's why there's such a focus here about policy, about regulation. There's a lot of really interesting conversations to be had here, and so our thought process was, what is uniquely different about permissionless? Well, it's that we have a lot of these really interesting regulators and thought leaders in crypto regulation here. We're right before election season, so let's bring that spotlight. Let's talk to media and tell them about how this is a really interesting opportunity. This is not something that comes around very often. In reality, like once every 4 years.
Right.
And so that's what gets us to convince a lot of really great media partners like yourself to come out here, and then they help bring the spotlight to the event as a whole, help them distribute it to their audiences and things like that. So.
You mentioned two things on regulations that I want to touch on. First, where are the majority of your clients coming from? Are they US based or are they international?
Yeah, so we are geographically agnostic. I would say things tend to trend one way. We're very Western focused as a team. We're, I would say 60, 75% in the US, maybe 20% in the EU. So we're very Western focused.
Got it.
But we work with teams all over, but I would say a vast majority of the teams that we work on are coming out of the US. I mean, that's where a majority of the venture capital funding is. So all the biggest funds are mostly US based. I mean, of course, there's a lot of large APAC funds and things like that, but I would say a majority of the VC capital in the space comes from the US. And so they tend to back US based teams, which then kind of leads us to working with more teams that are based in the States.
Cool. And so that leads into my second question. I myself flew out with Stand With Crypto, the Coinbase 501c3 branch.
Yep.
Advocating for sensible crypto policy to meet with Colorado legislators in December of last year. And it's essentially been a scary time for builders in the US. We have regulatory ambiguity, maybe even some negativity from the folks who are able to impact the laws that impact us. Where do you see the future of policy in the US going? And maybe if you don't want to get too political, maybe you can just use that in the lens of the light of the builders that you're working with. Are they afraid to locate in the US? Are they trying to focus on being as decentralized as possible? How does all that interact?
Yeah, I think it's a big issue. I think there are definitely builders that we work with that are thinking about how to launch their ecosystems and their tokens and all these other distribution mechanisms in a really compliant way. And there's just not the backing from the government, from the SEC, the regulation needed in order to say, hey, this is how we can do this in a compliant way. And so if you don't have that, then you're scared because you don't want to end up like the Opine guys, right, who ended up getting some really serious, litigation against them brought by the SEC. And so people are definitely scared. Now, my long-term thesis is I'm just really bullish on the judiciary system, right? I think what we've seen time and time again is when you see Gensler and the SEC and even the CFTC in some cases overstep their bounds, we have this other branch of the government that's there to actually litigate that, right, and actually talk about it in government, right? And so I think people are very who's going to win and what's the impact of that? In my estimation, we're building for the long term. We're playing long-term games with long-term people. I don't think it really matters, right? Because yes, Kamala wins. In reality, I think it's actually more bullish if we get a negative crypto-focused party in office over a long-term trajectory, because they're going to bring up more issues. Those issues are going to get judiciated in court quicker, and that's going to lead to better, smarter regulation faster, right? And real regulation, not hey, this is all cool and we're going to kick the can down the road, but actually getting to the meat of it, right? Understanding, how tokens function in the context of securities. What are security tokens? What the measurements need to be to launch those things? What does compliance look like? Those are massive issues that we can't just say, hey, Trump's going to come into office and everything's going to be awesome and kumbaya, right? We have to actually get to the root of these problems, because I do think the SEC does have a legitimate place to be able to regulate a lot of these things, right? A lot of these things are securities, right? If there are, if you are looking at a small team that's running a DeFi protocol that has, their revenue go back to token holders, that is a security, right? And that needs to be regulated, because we do see a lot of consumers get really screwed by slow rugs and a lot of these bad business practices, right? So we do need sensible regulation. How do we get there the quickest? I think both ways we get it, but I would argue that it's not as big of a deal who gets elected, because I think we'll get it either way.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. It shines light on the other side of the coin and why with what some could perceive as a con, there are also pros that come with that.
Of course.
So kind of like wrapping up, zooming out, last question.
Yeah.
We're halfway through the first day of Permissionless. What's your big takeaway from this conference so far?
Yeah, I think it's really like the regulation stuff, right? Like not to kind of double back on it, but I do think it's like really interesting to have this differentiated light about what's happening on the regulation side. You have like senators and congressional members getting out there talking about this, like igniting their base, talking about the issues that are happening. And so that's honestly like the most bullish, exciting thing, right? And you have like great people like the Blockworks guys who are getting out there, having these conversations in open light, right? Bringing all these people together. And it's like we're right around election season, right? And it only happens once every 4 years. And so this is the time where we really need to have the open dialogue, have the discussions, get out there, or else you're just going to be stuck in the same kind of echo chamber for the next 4 years.
100%. Ishan, if anybody wants to get in contact with you, either personally or to maybe explore working with Scrib as their PR marketing comms firm, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah. You can look us up at Scrib3.co, but Scrib. But yeah, you can check out our website. If you could probably get a hold of us one way or another, Twitter, Telegram, you can always hit me on Twitter. And so, yeah, there's plenty of ways to get in touch with us. But
awesome.
yeah.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
And for anybody else who wants to catch any of the other interviews we've done here at Permissionless, head over to the Neo News Today YouTube channel to catch the latest interviews.